Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Track to Noise. It is the international break, so there is no Ipswich Town games to cover this week, but we are still coming out with a pod. I'm joined today, firstly, by Mr. Richard Popple. How are you doing, Richard?
Very well, Tom. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, and we are not alone on today's show. I'm delighted to say we are joined by Kallum Brisset and Phil Ham of TWTD. Phil, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being on the show today to discuss all things Ipswich Town.
Hello.
And Kallum as well. Thank you again, Kallum, for joining us. We'll start looking into the show here, guys, just before we discuss all things Ipswich from this season, past and present. Phil, just really, obviously, we've talked before recording today. You're sort of over not to sort of talk about how many years you've been around the globe, so to speak, but 30 or so plus years with TWTD. Just talk about that initial sort of conception and how you've seen TWTD grow over the years and fan engagement and all that lovely stuff.
Yeah, well, 1994. I just left university, and me and Steve Mellon were both in a similar position. Steve Mellon, who some people may remember, used to write a column in the East Anglian a few years ago. And someone said to him, Gavin Barber and Phil Arnold were the editors of Those Were the Days, the fanzine as it was, that they sort of said to Steve, well, do you fancy taking it on? And he said to me one night in the pub that he'd been offered this opportunity. And I said, well, if you do it, I might do it with you if you're up for it. And here we are 31 years later. It sort of naturally sort of came about at the same time as the internet obviously sort of became more, or sort of entered my kind of realm, but I think generally entered kind of people's lives around 1995. And I happened to be on a course that was where I was learning about the internet, and it just seemed a natural thing for the two to come together. So that's where the website started from, and Gavin Wilding, who is a programmer, kind of contacted me out of the blue, and the website really kind of took off once he got involved, and he's still involved now, 30 years later in his case, and gradually it's grown over time. The fanzine gradually the website overtook the fanzine, and kind of the news side of it kind of became the main thing, and I've been doing it full time for about 25 years now.
Fantastic, Kallum. Not as long, but you've joined the team in the past few years. Talk about your role with TWTD and just the Ipswich Town in general.
Yeah, not quite so long. I've been a Town fan for most of my life. I'm 23 years of age now, so even before I was around is how long TWTD's been going. I've been involved for 2.5 years or so. Gradually over time, I've become kind of more and more involved. I do kind of all the matches now alongside Phil, press conferences, etc. So heavily involved with kind of getting to know the players and Kieran McKenna and the manager and all the rest of it. And going to matches home and away. The last few years have been a pretty good ride at that as well. So not a bad time to be coming into it.
How is that, Kallum? Like being a fan, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like meeting, these players who can, you were supporting or whatever from the sideline. What's that like? Is it difficult not to be a little bit starstruck, or are you professional all the way?
Possibly a little bit difficult, but you kind of get used to it quite quickly, to be honest. It's obviously a good experience, a good feeling. It's quite different watching the game kind of from a media point of view rather than on the terraces. But again, you kind of get used to it, and I enjoy both aspects of it, to be honest. Even when you are in the kind of media setup, you're still a fan, aren't you? So it's a lot of good fun.
I was wondering if that's sort of slight. Go on, Phil. Go on.
Although you can't really whoop and cheer. I can remember when I first started going in the press box, one of my colleagues kind of looking at me when I got quite excited about Town scoring. So you have to kind of keep it reasonably under wraps at times. But I think kind of it's you still have that kind of fan instinct in you, however long you've been in a press box.
I was going to say, Phil, I was very lucky to be at the Norwich game recently, and I saw you not keeping your cool when we scored.
It's been a long time, was it? So many years, I can't remember. 4 years or whatever it was since we'd last won, something like that. Well, I've been to all those games in between from 2009, wasn't it? 2009 under Jim to the other. So yes, so I think it was. Yes, I think it was kind of it was difficult to keep it all quite under wraps then. But yeah, yes, as I say, you don't lose that kind of fan instinct, do you? I think.
As you shouldn't, as we
absolutely
don't.
not.
Yeah, as we like to keep that on this podcast. The first thing I want to speak to you guys really about is keeping that fan hat on, especially. Obviously, we did go down last season. I think maybe many of us didn't expect us to reach those heights so soon. But really, just looking at this season in particular, how would you feel? First, we've been about 10 or so games into 14 games for the season. Obviously, got a game in hand in a week or so, but things look to start to be taking shape. But how would you sort of, if you want to rate the season or just your thoughts on the season so far as the international break
It's a
sort of
developing
here and
season.
take forward?
I think developing, don't you? And I think it's a not untypical season for a team that's been relegated, because you have that sort of period, that first month of the season, and I think it was sort of typified a bit by Leeds a couple of years ago when they actually visited us right at the end of August, didn't they? And I think half their players had been on strike or kind of trying to find themselves new clubs, and they'd had a first month which was the situation was the squad was in a state of flux, and I think one of the players that scored against us, I think, that was transferred that following week, wasn't he? Because there was a few days left of the transfer window. So, and I think you can see that going back even further, really, that teams that have come down, sometimes it takes quite a while for them to grow into the division or the team to develop. If you remember West Ham under Pardew going back 20 years when we played them in the playoffs, I think they had a season that was very much of one of development and kind of broke into the playoffs fairly late on. But I think we're kind of on a much steeper curve than that. You just look at the form. I mean, Kieran McKenna has pointed in his press conferences, isn't he, to the how things have been since the first transfer window, first international break, because that coincided with the end of the transfer window. And he said generally form has been on the up since then, and I think he's right. I think the position that we're in, 7th place, 2 points off the playoffs, was it 6 points off the top two with a game in hand? I really think we couldn't really be in too much better a position, really, given the fact that we're developing a new team. Really, you look at the number. It's been pointed out a few games. Kallum will recall. A few journalists elsewhere have sort of pointed out that when we've been to a couple of places this season, Leif Davis has been the only player that started the equivalent match 2 seasons ago. Well, that's quite a lot of change, isn't it? And a lot of that change was this summer. A lot of the change was late in the window, so those players didn't have a pre-season, and in some cases didn't have a pre-season full stop anywhere. And so it's taken a bit of time for them to get going. But I think the fact that we've won our last 2 away games 4-1 suggests that things are moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Kallum, as Phil said, we won 4-1 against Swansea on the weekend before the international break. That you were at the game on the weekend. Just thoughts as well on the season so far, and just we've sort of coined the phrase as the season's gone on. We kind of hated it at the start, but I think it is maybe a good term now. The team's starting to gel. Is that very much where your head's at, and with what Phil said of how it's been a bit of a slow progression this season, but we are very much starting to see the fruits of Town's labour so far? Would you say?
Yeah, I think it's that G word, isn't it, that kind of gets everyone talking about the Paul Cook days from a few years ago when we needed time to gel. But it's right, isn't it? You know, the turnover that we've had more turnover, a lot of turnover last year going into the Premier League, and then kind of you had that expectation maybe that there'd be a bit more continuity in the summer. It's no secret that we lost a few more players than we'd have wanted to have lost in the summer. So there's been kind of more change than we would have wanted. But I think gradually by the end of the window, we managed to kind of get our house in order in terms of building the squad that we wanted, kind of having two capable players in each position by the end of it. And since then, we've gradually been getting better in terms of the performances. I think arguably probably the most exciting thing is I don't think we're anywhere near our best yet. You look at the results in the last 2 away games against QPR and Swansea. Yes, both 4-1 victories, but I still think there's partnerships and patterns that still haven't really been formed yet. That when they do get going, I think we can really take the league by storm. That's not to say that will happen, But it's certainly something that could happen, and something that's obviously really exciting. And the gap between ourselves and the teams above us isn't that much. We've got a busy run of games after this international break heading towards Christmas, as it always is at this time of year. Even more so because we've got one more game than everyone else with the rescheduled game up at Blackburn. And it's really a chance to kind of get some points on the board. You know, how different the table can look between the November international break and the table at Christmas is huge with the amount of games that are taking place. The leagues may be starting to take shape. We're maybe starting to see which teams are and aren't going to be those that are kind of lasting the course. And as I say, we're one of those teams that are on the up. I think it's won 6 of the last 10. The performances in there have been pretty good as well. Probably maybe deserve to win 1 or 2 more of those. The Watford game last week springs to mind as a game that it wasn't a disaster that it was a draw, especially when you look at the wins that surrounded it. That could well have been a win there, and we could well be sitting here talking about having won the last 4. But it's 10 points from 12. We're on the up, and I think some of the players are really starting to find their feet as well. I think Sindra Rala on the right has been getting better game by game. Ivan Azon scored his first goal at the weekend. We've got the 2 best and most informed left wingers in the league, and George Hurst, who by his own accounts hasn't had that good a season, has still scored 5 league goals in the first 13 games, which isn't a bad return at all. So I think we're looking all right, and certainly less concerns than there might have been a month in after a shaky first few weeks of the season.
If we just go back to the sort of summer, both of you have kind of mentioned, that there was a lot more turnover than I think everyone was expecting, and that obviously did, disrupt things a little bit, and that's taking some time to sort of calm down. What was it like covering that? Because, like Phil, you mentioned like a lot of it was happening at the end of the summer. Was it a case because from the outside there were lots of names being thrown around, as there always are, but most of them don't mean very much. But there were a few this summer that kept coming back. The name would be heard, and then a few weeks later it'd be back, and the Hackney saga and all that kind of stuff. So what was it kind of like covering it in the summer?
Yeah, it's interesting at the moment covering Town because it's changed a lot at Premier League level, hasn't it? The coverage of transfers and things in this over a summer, certainly compared with where it was when Town were in the Premier League 20 years ago. The interest and your Fabrizio Romanos and people like that weren't around 20 years ago. And so who obviously got relationships with agents and whatever that the likes of us couldn't dream to have. So these things come out of the blue. You have to kind of, and also there's so much more just total nonsense than there was. I mean, there's always been total nonsense, but there are just people who just kind of make names up. And so Ipswich are interested in player X, and there's absolutely nothing in it. And you ask the club about it, and you kind of some of the names you say, yeah, that's utter bollocks, almost literally with some of them. So it was like that, wasn't it? That there were players that we obviously were chasing all summer. Azon, I think, was kind of one that was on and then off, and then I think was suddenly back on again. Jens Kjuster was a similar sort of position in that I think we kind of looked at it at the start of the summer, but then I think his expectations may have been that he was going to get a Premier League club. There was also interest from clubs in Italy and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and I think Spanish clubs were interested. And for whatever reason, I think after the Hackney situation, I mean, that's another sort of story that was ongoing for quite a lot of the summer, wasn't it, really? That I think it had certainly been going for a few weeks before I kind of reported that we'd had an offer accepted. And then that kind of rumbled on, and then he came down here, had a look around, and clearly it didn't. I think he was after a Premier League move, and so I think he ultimately felt, I'll just spend another year in the Premier League at Middlesbrough, and then perhaps get my Premier League move next summer or maybe January. So we then went back for Jens Kjuster. I think from a Kieran McKenna point of view, I think it was a very frustrating summer because I think he'd have liked much more of his squad together earlier to get them in for pre-season. So he didn't have a first month that was so disrupted, and that he was inculcating the McKenna way into his players from the end of the transfer window onward, with the season already up and running. I think he'd have liked to have taken more of his squad abroad for the pre-season camp, or had them at Portman Road in for much of July. So I mean, I think that is has been a frustration for a couple of transfer windows, maybe 3-4 transfer windows, maybe, now that we've not quite got the business done that we've wanted. I think we've kind of found ourselves coming out of windows a striker short on 2 or 3 occasions now, I'd probably say. I think we're probably covered this summer on that front, because I think Azon can play as a 9 as well as Akpon can play as a 9 as well as Azon and Hurst. But yeah, I think we kind of, in a roundabout way, ended up with a decent squad. I've kind of heard people on the inside, as it were, at the club, on the sort of coaching side, have told people that this squad is, they are in training, they're a level above of what they've had before. Do you know what I mean? That they may not have hit their straps fully as a team week in, week out yet, and as Kallum said, we're not fully developed. There is more to come, but on a day-to-day basis in training, you look at the players and they are better than they've had before. So ultimately, despite a summer of disruption, and I haven't really talked about all the players that have left, because there were quite a lot, and I think some of them we didn't anticipate going. Sammy Morsey, I think we might have thought maybe getting to the end of his days, but with the club, because of his age, but the fact that he went relatively late as well. Nathan Broadhead, there's a number of them. So given all the change that we've had I think we're kind of, I think we can sort of be quite pleased with where we are really at this point in the season.
Yeah. Kallum, in terms of the players that have come in, who do you think has been the most successful in sort of having impact straight away? Obviously, Matassi was kind of made, Morsey's kind of role his own now, and after maybe a few shaky games early on, seems to be really settled in there, and a few others as well. But who's been the kind of standout for you in terms of the signings?
For me, the name you just mentioned there, Azor Matasiwa, I think he's a vital cog in this Ipswich Town midfield now. He really has taken Sam Morsey's kind of presence on the field in terms of the role that he brings. He's one of the first names on the team sheet. He's played every minute, barring the game he was suspended for, which I think we missed him in that game. Even the fixture it was, where we were kind of expected to have a lot of the ball and maybe not need to do as much defending. Turned out we completely capitulated and conceded 3 goals that maybe we wouldn't have done had he been on the pitch. But yeah, he's been so important to this side, and like you say, had maybe a shaky first game or two, which is only natural. He'd never played in English football before. He'd come over from having played in France and Holland. But yeah, I think he's showing why that we really did bring him in to be kind of that sitter of the two in midfield, doing all the dirty work. And he's formed a couple of good partnerships in midfield. We mentioned Jens Kajusta. They know each other very well, and there's been times where those two have looked excellent. But I have to say, in the last few weeks, I've been most impressed by him alongside Jack Taylor. I think Jack Taylor in the last few games has played terrifically well. He's got a bit of that kind of grit in him as well, that bit of fire to kind of get stuck in and do a bit of the dirty work, but also in kind of an attacking sense that maybe Matasiwa doesn't bring. But yeah, I think Azor Matasiwa for me is probably the standout one in terms of how important they are to the side. But there's obviously, particularly in the attacking areas, the names that kind of jump off the page. We've got Sindre Vala Egli, who's obviously the most expensive player in the history of the division. He's got obviously lots of raw talent at the age that he is, so you're always going to get excited by that. So yeah, there's a few names on there. Marcelino Nunez obviously came with a lot of baggage and a lot of kind of controversy in the move based on where he came from and how he was revealed. But yeah, I think we've done really. I actually think we've done really well considering how broken up the squad was at the end of the summer, which wasn't really in the plan. To come through with the squad that we've got, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil, obviously we spoke a lot about signings from this summer. Past year or so, it's, as you mentioned earlier, Davis really is one of the few OGs left from the promotion season a couple of years ago. So even players who were here during the summer are still kind of fresh to an extent. We're starting to see now, I think obviously maybe going down a league has helped to an extent, but are there any players who, I mean, only a few you could argue covered themselves in much glory last year, but are there a few players now who we're starting to see the best of them in a Town shirt this season? If anyone that comes to mind for you as the season's gone on a bit?
Well, yeah, I think the obvious two are Jack Clark and Jaden Philligan on the left, aren't they? Philligan came in January, very significant transfer fee. Was it 22 million, something like that? Pretty much there or thereabouts, the joint highest fee we'd paid, wasn't it? With along with Amari Hutchinson, and other than scoring 2 goals at Man United, which weren't the greatest goals you'll ever see. I don't think he did very much at all, did he? I think most of us kind of were sort of at the end of the season scratching our heads a bit about why we'd paid this money for him. But so far in this division, teams just haven't known how to cope with him at Portman Road, certainly, because all his goals have come at Portman Road so far, haven't they? And what goals they've been. I think he's obviously been under instruction that if you get the ball on the right, you can see a bit on the left. If you get a bit of space to cut in and have a go, and don't be and don't kind of be kind of shy about it if you've missed one, or you've had a couple blocked. I think he's just told to keep at it, and a goal will come, and usually it has. And Jack Clark, I think, is similarly, I think, very unlucky not to start more games, but simply because Jaden Philligan's been scoring so many goals that he hasn't had more of an opportunity. But and I'm sure Kallum will quote his stat in a minute about Jack Clark and his goal scoring this season. I think when he's come off the bench or when he's started, he's been excellent. What is the record he's got at the moment, Kallum?
In terms of goals, he's scored 6 goals. 4 of them have been off the bench.
But
the
I
one
think
that
he's
I
the
posted
highest
the other
scorer
day was
within.
most fewest minutes per goal in terms of time spent on the pitch out of anyone that scored. I think more than 3.
In the Championship,
he's been so effective when when he has been on the pitch, he's just been so effective. And he's been playing that super sub role really well. When he does get the chance to start, he started at Bristol City, scored from the penalty spot. Started on Saturday at Swansea and scored a wonderful opening goal. And by my money was for me the best player on the pitch. So yeah, he's having a really good season, and is, as Phil says, unfortunate not to have started as many games as he had purely because of the form of his fellow winger.
Well, it feels like we can have Jaden at home and Jack Clark away. That might work nicely for the rotation. Just one more quick question before we go to the break. Can we talk about the defence a little bit? Because we still don't seem to really. We're obviously on a decent run of form, but we still don't quite seem to be able to keep consistent clean sheets, or really look like we're going to keep consistent clean sheets. And obviously, in the Championship promotion season, that wasn't necessarily the model. Our model was kind of, we will score more than you, and we were very effective at it that year. It's obviously taken us a little bit of time to get more of a goal threat this year, but that seems to be clicking now a bit more. But the defence, they do seem to have a bit of a shaky moment in them. Quite a few games we've seen that on an individual basis and on a team basis. Can you kind of put your finger on sort of what's going on there? The right back role looks a bit all over the place, and obviously the centre backs seem to be changing quite a bit. What have you guys been seeing there, Phil?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of, as you say, there's been a lot of individual errors, and I think kind of the defenders themselves haven't necessarily been the ones at fault, have they? On quite a number of occasions. I think you look at the goal, again, the Watford goal, for example, which I think to a great degree was sort of a bit of naivety from the boy Sindra not tracking his man as a 1-2 was being played, and I think the one on Saturday, I think there's sort of the element of misfortune to some degree, and I think their player sort of scuffed a shot, didn't he? And I think that sort of took it away from Jack Taylor, who otherwise would have cleared it. I think it's kind of it's interesting hearing Kieran McKenna talk about it. His press comments when he's kind of said that we had sort of two games, the Middlesbrough game and the Charlton game, where we were caught on the break, caught short, weren't we, on a number of occasions, and actually probably more occasions at Middlesbrough than we were at Charlton, although we actually conceded more against Charlton, which I think kind of caught him out a bit. I don't think it hadn't really been an issue, had it, until that point. And actually, I think when you look at it, we haven't conceded loads of chances across the season as a whole, even even though kind of that early stage of the season where we weren't picking up points that frequently. So yeah, I think there is kind of a thing about relationships being established and kind of people knowing where they go. I think the second goal against Middlesbrough, there was a bit of a kind of look between the left back and Kipre, Davies and Kipre, about which one was going to push out to the fella who was wide, and there's still a bit of that they've not played together on a huge number of occasions. But I think also we've been a little bit unlucky, haven't we? Teams have seemed to score literally their only chance, haven't they, in matches? Whereas we've kind of had to really battle in some matches to get one goal and sort of created far more opportunities than to score far more goals. We have been hit by that kind of sucker punch on rather too many occasions up to now. But again, I think it's something that will come and develop over the course of the season, whether that means sort of particular personnel will be established, or as kind of is the want, as Kieran wants it. I think, everybody being up to speed, everybody playing regularly, so that over the course of the season, it's not about an 11, it's about a squad. Whether he eventually kind of has to kind of come to the point where, well, this is the back four, because they are the ones that are most successful, remains to be seen. But again, you said it was a couple of years ago, it was a case of we're going to score more than you. Well, if we're winning 4-1 away, then it could well be the case of the same again, couldn't it, really?
It could, yeah. Long may it continue if we keep this goal scoring form up. All right, we will take a very short break and we will be back with you in a minute.
Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of Tractor Noise. Phil and Kallum from TWTD on today's show. Thank you again so much, guys, for joining us. A few weeks ago, Kallum, we sort of saw rumblings, maybe for the first time ever in under his tenure with McKenna, whether that was, and we sort of saw a few clubs maybe wanted to get his signature, but with the performances, some weren't too happy. I'm not necessarily going to be jumping on that bandwagon at all on today's show, but we've seen like the likes of a Celtic job being available. That rumour does seem to have died down now. International break, there's a lot of time to reflect, isn't there? Just as a fan, I feel this is the case, but as someone who covers the club, and obviously it's predominantly, even last season, it's been all praises for McKenna, as I think it should be, considering the job he's done. But do you feel this is the first time where there's, maybe not known because the results have been good, but there's been a slight hint of potential animosity or a questioning of his role there? Because I feel it's been his job whether he wants it really, for the most part. But given how the season's gone, it's been maybe for the first time not been the case.
Yeah, possibly. I think part of that is down to expectation as well. The League One season, there was a lot of expectation that year that Ipswich Town needed to get themselves out of League One. But the expectation, while it was high, it was kind of less profile, being kind of in the third tier. There was no expectation at all to do what we did in the Championship 2 years ago in terms of getting that second promotion. And then in the Premier League, I don't want to use the word free hit because it wasn't a free hit, but there was kind of that feeling that, okay, it's our first Premier League season for 22 years. It would have to go really, really, really badly for anyone to kind of put the blame on McKenna if it was to end in relegation, which obviously it did. But then going into this season with obviously all the money that has been spent, the quality of the squad, there was that expectation both internally and externally that Ipswich Town were the title favourites, were tipped by many to be the team to win the league and kind of romp back to promotion. And when it didn't start the way that it did, understandably there was kind of murmurs, especially when kind of putting the Premier League aside, mainly just because of the calibre of kind of teams that we were playing. It's felt always on an upward trajectory for the last few years. So when there was the kind of expectation that Ipswich Town were going to go into the likes of Derby County at home and going up to Preston early in the season with a better squad, expecting to win, when it doesn't happen, there is that little bit of pressure. I think in some ways there was perhaps a vocal minority. I don't think it was quite as bad as maybe some people were painting it out to be. But it probably did reach a head in the Charlton game, which we've vowed not to speak about, but I'm going to mention it now just because it was a really poor night. It was probably the for me the worst night under McKenna so far up to that point. But it was about kind of the response, wasn't it? It was and we've responded well since, in terms of 3 wins out of 4, unbeaten in that run. Could well be 4 wins out of 4, and suddenly everything's rosy again. That's how fickle football fans are, and that's how quickly things can change in this industry. And suddenly, when the Celtic job came up, with the kind of positive run that we've been on again, suddenly it was a case of, oh no, we really don't want to lose him, and I think some fans maybe taking it for granted again how lucky we are to have Kieran McKenna as our manager, and have done for nearly 4 years now, and everyone's kind of fallen in love with the project that he's built and how he's managed to kind of turn us around from being in the middle of League One to having a year in the Premier League, and now one of those teams fighting to get back there and kind of expected to get back there. So yeah, there was a little bit of talk, but it never felt like it was too extreme. And suddenly, with a few wins, suddenly everyone's happy again. So yeah, it's a nice place to be again, unlike about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Phil? Because as Kallum just said, he's been with us now for 4 years, which in modern football that's quite a long time, really. And there has been 3 or 4 junctures where it's felt like it could be close to the end, particularly turning down the Palace role when we were in the Championship, and then that summer where I think everyone thought he was going to go before there was a bit of a U-turn. Is there any chance that Celtic thing? I don't want to put you on the spot, but that Celtic thing doesn't seem to be dead in the water. Do you know what I mean? Because I know it's a lot of money that they'd probably have to pay for him, and Martin O'Neill's kind of said that he may stay on until the end of the year if they'd want him to, potentially. Do you think that's completely dead in the water, though?
I don't think you can say completely dead in the water, but I sort of get the impression that if we're doing well and Kieran can see an eye towards getting back in the Premier League this season, I don't think that the Celtic job is that attractive to him. I might be wrong, but I just think you think about the career. He's talked a lot about his career path, hasn't he? Or rather, him having a career path that's fairly well mapped out has been spoken about a lot. Mm-hmm. That ultimately his aim is to be at a top Premier League club. I think being at Ipswich back in the Premier League takes him a step nearer to that than going to Celtic would do, because I think you can, unless he goes to Celtic and has does remarkably well, which means doing well in the Champions League, which you don't really see them doing because they've not really got the budget to compete with clubs in the bigger leagues around Europe these days. So I just and profile wise and all those kind of things. If you get promoted with Ipswich and then he's with Ipswich next year, or alternatively gets us promoted in a more established Premier League club that's a mid-range Premier League club, it shows interest, then I think that's kind of more where his ambitions would lie and more take him towards his ultimate ambitions. So it could happen. I do think, but I do think again, as you mentioned, the fact that there's such a lot of money to be would have to be splashed down, not just in compensation, but of course his wages, because Celtic would have to pay him the same sort of wages he's on here, which are very significant. I know they've come down since we got relegated, but presumably they'd have to pay him on the basis that we could be back in the Premier League again in 6, 7, 8 months' time or whatever. So. Yeah, I mean, there will come a time, won't there, as we've I know it's hard to kind of
Comprehend
to
it is.
think about it in too much detail, but I suspect that this probably isn't it. And I suspect from Kieran's perspective, seeing out this season is, I think that, you know, getting us promoted would be a second sort of success at this level, which I think takes, you know, another kind of another good tick on his CV, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, and absolutely, it proves that first one could never be classed as a fluke or, you know, a one-off or whatever. So yeah, it would really solidify his reputation. And also, I think what, you know, a lot of fans love about McKenna is, and why it does feel like a massive kind of emotional thing, the thought of him leaving, is because he's invested so much in the kind of area and the town and everything else, as much as he has in the professional side of the football club, and you see it does mean a lot to him, which, you know, obviously means a lot to us as well. Just speaking about things off the pitch just for a second, maybe it's me, I've noticed this, I don't know, but it feels like we don't have as much communication from the owners and things like that than we did maybe a couple of seasons ago, where we would get interviews from the game changer people who we've not heard from for a little while, and even the others that came in a little bit after that. We don't really seem to get that messaging anymore. Is that something that you guys have noticed covering the club?
I think it's a conscious thing from the club. I think there was, I think they may have regretted to some extent putting the Three Lions sort of front and centre in the way that they did after the takeover, because they were only a small part of it. Do you know what I mean? They were, I don't know, a very small percentage of the takeover, but they were good figureheads for the takeover. They weren't from the pension fund. Do you know what I mean? They were essentially the people who put the pension fund together with Mark Ashton and Mike O'Leary that kind of forged this link that kind of ended up as game changer and taking over the club. And I think that there was a conscious effort once Mark Ashton had come in, because obviously it was a few months after the takeover that Mark Ashton came in as the CEO. I think there was a conscious effort after that not to kind of dilute the message, if you see what I mean, that everything came from Mark Ashton and directed by Mark Ashton rather than from the American arms. And actually, we did have a kind of example of that inadvertently when Brett Johnson put out an email a few months ago talking about kind of, I think the pension fund trying to sell some of their shares and whatever, which kind of hadn't gone past through the club. And it was a surprise to the club when these emails started coming out. So I think it was in order to avoid those kind of mixed messages, that the message and the kind of approach of the club came through Mark Ashton and what he was dictating, rather than what any of the owners were dictating. And obviously you've got the Three Lions, you've got the pension fund, you've got Bright Path, you've got elements within Bright Path as well. So there's quite a disparate group there. So I think it is important that for any organisation to kind of go through one central point for their messaging and, you know what I mean, and their general kind of public approach. And yes, so that's probably why we've heard less of I think actually when you've heard from Americans in the last, or any of the Americans in the last couple of years, it's been Ed Schwartz, hasn't it? Really, Ed Schwartz rather, and not really anybody else. So, and again, I think he is the kind of the voice of the pension fund, which remains the kind of main stakeholder for the moment. So yeah, I think that's quite a sensible approach, really. And I kind of I don't think it would be ideal for various bits of the ownership to be kind of doing podcasts and interviews and that kind of thing. I think it's better that it's all kind of kept to the club making statements or the club doing interviews.
No, you're right. I think that they were kind of happy to do it when they were a sort of small fish in League One, well, big fish in League One. But maybe now it's a bit. There's more money on the table. I guess they have to keep the messaging, a little bit more in house, perhaps. Callum, have you heard anything about sort of? There was obviously loads done at Portman Road in the season between Championship promotion and the Premier League. Have you heard any more, or is there any more news about plans for the Cobbold or anything?
No, not that I've heard. I think it's gone not quiet on that front, but I think long term there's still that kind of plan to expand it, but it's not something that's at the forefront of the club's kind of list of priorities, because what it would mean, you'd have to move the away fans, wouldn't you? You'd have to relocate home supporters, and at the moment the club are doing very well. They're selling out or getting close to selling out the stadium. That's kind of not something that they kind of want to do for the time being. And in terms of, we talk about redeveloping the Cobbold in terms of extra capacity, I don't think the capacity would drastically kind of go up. I don't think there's quite the market at Portman Road for kind of making it into some sort of super stadium with, into the 40s. I think it would kind of end up in somewhere in kind of the mid to high 30s region is kind of the kind of peak capacity that we'd be talking about. So I don't think there's kind of a drastic desire to get that done urgently, but it is something that's kind of on the horizon. Anyone who's kind of been in the Cobbold stand recently will tell you that it's maybe a bit past its kind of sell by date in terms of how, you've got pillars in the way and kind of not an awful lot of space in there for the size of the project it is. I guess the fact that the road that sits behind it, Portman Road itself, is now no longer a work road that's used for traffic and whatnot, is obviously something that's beneficial, because whenever the club do want to kind of do that expansion and get that done, then there's room for it to happen. But I think the projects that were important to the club in and around the stadium weren't necessarily redeveloping and increasing the capacity, but getting things kind of Premier League ready and whatnot in terms of new floodlights, new pitch. That's all been done. The whole entire complex in the West Stand has been kind of rebuilt, so it's got kind of more hospitality seats where they can obviously make some more, get further revenue, which is obviously hugely important in kind of the modern day game. So I think all the important bits are kind of done on that front, and the next major project that the club are kind of doing and is in progress is actually at the training ground as opposed to the stadium itself. And Phil and I are up at the training ground every week pretty much, and every week something's kind of changed up there. There's more kind of soils and building work going on. There's a big building kind of on the side of the training ground that seems to be improving layer on layer every time we turn up there. Kieran McKenna's kind of referenced the new building that's going up as kind of overlooking the training pitches now, whereas before you kind of couldn't see it over the fence. And that's all kind of been signed and approved, and eventually the first team will have a new building, a new place to train, which is far more better for kind of attracting players going forward. If you've got kind of a kind of mega facility. And it'll also improve the academy setup. The academy is now Category 1. The academy side will move into where the first team are currently training, the women's team as well, which is obviously they're in the second tier for the first time ever this season. So I think on all fronts, the academy women's side and the men's first team are all kind of on the up, and Playford Road is gradually becoming a better facility for that, and that's the priority, I think, at the moment, ahead of getting things done at Portman Road, because I think everything that needs to be done at Portman Road has now been done. And slowly but surely, everything's kind of getting better in and around the club.
Certainly,
the next thing they might actually do, I think once they do, and it's right, I think they're doing it in kind of stages. There's the training ground at the moment. I think the next thing they do at the ground that's major will probably be to the West Stand, adding seats. I think they'll do something like add 10, 15, 20 rows at the back of the stand to try and get rid of all the stanchions that make so many seats restricted view, including the old press box, and add other kind of facilities and things in there. And I think part of that is with a view so that at some point, once they do knock down the Cobbold stand, they don't lose all that capacity, because they'll have had that capacity at the back of the West stand, because obviously they have got quite a lot of space behind that as well. And in terms of Cobbold, yeah, I think there is an agreement of how many square meters they've got to work back into when they build the new stand, as part of the kind of, because they're obviously building that the leisure centre, aren't they? The swimming pool, the aquatic centre on that car park, and the council kind of put out their plans of how that will be, and there's kind of a footprint of where the new stand will kind of go then. So, but yeah, as Kallum says, that's not next month. That's going to be probably a couple of years down the line, I would guess, with work at the West Stand in the in-between time.
Before we go to last,
exciting times.
I know it's like an area of the stadium that's like the least capacity right now. I really like the Cobbold stand. It's such a unique sort of look for a club as to that sort of lower tier we have of the sort of hospitality seats now. I think it will get expanded at one point, but it's a unique design with the halo sponsors on the sort of rim above there as well. I think it will be a shame to see that. I hope there's some still aspects of that design still in there. However, it changes
of the lettering across the stand. I think that's quite iconic, isn't it? I think that's where every team photo since 1971, I think it was, that stand went up. Yeah, they've all had that Ipswich Town Football Club in the background, and I think they need to kind of replicate that in the way that Tottenham did with the big, with the cockerel on top of the stand there when they moved. They kept that. I think that's the same kind of thing Ipswich needs to do with the Ipswich Town Football Club.
Definitely. Getting back to on the pitch stuff, sorry, Richard, there. And we're looking ahead before we finish today's show. Again, Phil, Kallum, thank you so much for joining us. We are approaching January. We've discussed the squad depth and all that sort of stuff, but getting to that busy period, I'm sure it is a very busy period for you too, and maybe slight dreading it after Christmas perhaps. But are there areas of, I don't want to say concern, areas of concern, but just areas you would potentially need strengthening? Obviously, we don't know how injuries are going to play out, and that will obviously be a factor. I've kind of been of the agreement of opinion that left back has always been an area with the Townsend injury. Unfortunately, I know Young can kind of fill his shoes to an extent, but fullbacks maybe need to be strengthened to an extent. But just thoughts on the squad, and if it does need improving, where can that be as we roll on? Go to Phil first.
Fewer right backs. Fewer right backs. More left backs. Yeah, I think you're right. I think we need at least one, maybe two right backs to go, don't we? I think where does that leave us? Left back. Yeah, I think Connor Townsend very, very unlucky to get injured in the final pre-season friendly, because I think he showed himself to be a very capable player last season, didn't he? In the games that he played, Matasiwa, there's no obvious cover for him. I think people a week or so ago might have said we probably need more cover up front because Azon still hasn't scored, but Azon's scored now, so we'll see how he does in the next few months, whether he's kind of come through as someone that we can trust to start as the number 9. Equally, Akpom, how well he does between now and January, whether we kind of need to strengthen that area. But yeah, I mean, I think when you look at that squad, you're still looking at players that are developing into the team, developing into the league. In the case of Volaragele, and so it's probably sort of too early to kind of make those decisions in a way, isn't it? I imagine that Kieran McKenna and scouts and the recruitment department are looking at these things, but equally, what they're looking at now might be very different by late December, because other players could have hit their straps in the manner that Philogene and Clark have done sort of this season, having signed in January and last summer. They could have shown more what they can do in that time, but I don't think it's going to need an enormous amount of change. Do you? I mean, no. I think that kind of the basis of the squad is pretty good, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more just brushing up those cracks, if any, rather. It's hard to really predict at the moment, isn't it? Because obviously we don't know what areas do need covering up. I think it's just, as we both said, the fullback position really is the only one that's sort of glaring out there, isn't it, for the time being. Callum, just looking ahead, really, to the more immediate future, I'd just say we've got Wrexham coming up of the next game after the break. They've very much been a team that's caught the eyes of not just the UK media but the whole world, really, haven't they? With the ownership that's been there. We saw a familiar face in Cameron Burgess in South Wales this most recent game. Richard's favourite player in the most recent years has been Nathan Broadhead. Obviously, a big shock to see him leave this past summer. I was very much one of the many who was surprised to see him go. I'm not sure what your thoughts were on that, but it's going to be a big game this weekend with Wrexham coming down and Nathan Broadhead's return, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If Nathan Broadhead could stick two in his own net, just like Cameron Burgess did, then that would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, Broadie's an interesting one. I wasn't massively surprised to see him go in the summer. Just in the sense that this was even before kind of Jack Clark and Jayden Philogene both decided to start the season the way that they have.
Yeah,
we were quite stocked in that position as it was in terms of on the left-hand side, and you couldn't see a world where Clark or Philogene were going to go just because they would have. The club, I don't think, would have sanctioned a move if they didn't get anywhere close to kind of the fees that they paid for them a year ago, or in Philogene's case, earlier on in the calendar year. And for either of those two, I mean, we were never going to get 20 million for Jayden in the summer, and we were never going to get 15 million for Jack Clark. So I think that kind of opened the door for Nathan Broadhead, who gradually has had kind of less and less game time, particularly last season in the Premier League. And then the offer came in from Wrexham, and I have to say, I thought it was a brilliant bit of business for the football club, for a player in the final year of his contract to get the fee that we ended up getting from Wrexham. For a player who wanted to leave, he wanted to kind of make that move, go back to somewhere that he knows well, back home to North Wales as it was. So naturally, it was really disappointing to see him leave, just as it was with a lot of players who left in the summer and who left last summer. These kind of double promotion winning heroes that we've come to love, but football moves on at the end of the day, and it was a move that suited everyone. But it will be good to see him back at Portman Road. Hopefully, he doesn't score for them, obviously, but I'm sure he'll get a good reception on his return. There's obviously Kiefer Moore as well coming back as well with Wrexham. He's another one of the kind of, maybe not double promotion winning heroes, but someone who got us over the line and got us to the Premier League in that final few months of the Championship season, with 7 crucial goals scored in that game at Coventry that will be remembered well, alongside Cameron Burgess, obviously. So a couple of familiar faces coming back. Not a familiar opponent coming back. Wrexham have never played at Portman Road, so there's always a first for everything, and yes, it's a big game. We're on a decent run. Wrexham have picked up after a shaky start. Some people were tipping them to, continue their kind of momentum. Some were saying, "Oh, they'll get found out in the Championship." As it turns out, I think it's somewhere in between. It's been on a decent run, not losing too many games of late, but hopefully we can show our quality. Because there's no doubt, even with the money that Wrexham have spent, that the squad that we've got is quite possibly the best squad in the division. So if we can kind of continue our generally good home form that we've had, then I don't see why it can't be another 3 points at Portman Road.
Nice.
Brilliant.
And Phil, just a final one for you. 30 years covering town, doing this. Where does this kind of like side rank in terms of, the club is richer than it probably has ever been. We've got a championship all-star squad of players. We've got one of the most sought-after young managers in the country. Still, it seems like. So where is the club in terms of like over the last 30 years? It's in pretty rude health, it feels.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of I started doing this as George Burley. In fact, I think almost exactly the same time George Burley took over as manager. And that era was a terrific era, wasn't it? And that kind of development of a team year on year, getting up in the playoffs, and then the next season finishing 5th in the Premier League, which was an extraordinary achievement, wasn't it? But it then did have kind of things fell away quite significantly, relatively or very quickly, really. We went from 5th in the Premier League to relegation, and and then a very lengthy stay in the Championship, and then League One. So I think kind of it's a real renaissance for the club, isn't it? In so many ways, really, not just in terms of kind of having gone through that enormous fallow period and everything becoming very stale under Marcus Evans, where you just thought, well, mid-table in the Championship for a long while was kind of where it was at, wasn't it? And for a long period of time, and the whole kind of sort of ethos or the kind of approach strategy was that at some point Mick McCarthy would overachieve one season, we'd finish in the top 6 and go up through the playoffs, and fingers crossed and all that kind of stuff. And of course, if your strategy is that one good season will get you promoted, it only takes one bad season to get you relegated, and unfortunately that's what happened, wasn't it? And but ultimately I think that probably led to the takeover and the change at the club. I think we could have kind of probably continued to tread water in the Championship for a number of seasons to come if Mick had stayed on. And the mood might have got worse and worse, though. It's huge potential, really, isn't there? I think we got promoted before the owners, I think, anticipated getting us promoted to the Premier League, which meant that we were a little unprepared in some areas, and they had to do 111 jobs around the ground or whatever it was to get the ground up to standard. Well, that was probably replicated in other areas of the club, recruitment and all these other sides of it. And you've got a squad that have been built in League One, so you still got players from League One that, as good as they were at the level and fantastic that they were in getting us up 2 divisions, weren't going to cut it in the Premier League. But now we've come down again. We've rebuilt the squad. The squad's better in terms of kind of the level of individual players, and it's just getting the team to that next level, getting us into the Premier League, giving us a second go at the Premier League, and seeing if we can then establish ourselves in the manner that Bournemouth and I was going to say Wolves, but I'll avoid that. And Fulham and all these, a number of other clubs have done in recent years, and kind of being one of those teams that kind of you sort of see every week in the Premier League, and you don't kind of think, oh, they'll go down. Do you know what I mean? In the way that kind of the way it was last year. I think that's kind of. What's the word? It's yes. I think we've kind of we're only a couple of steps down the line, as it were. I think we're kind of there's a long way to go. How far we can go, I think, is the next thing. Do we then get to that kind of being established in a Bournemouth / Fulham type manner? Then where do we go? But I think that's probably 2 years' time when we come back for another podcast and discuss that then.
Yeah, it's regardless. It's very much exciting times for the club, and I'm very much looking to see how far Town can go. But that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks so much, Phil and Kallum from TWTD, for joining us. Really, really do appreciate it. As everyone is listening, I'm sure you already have, but please head over to TWTD to keep up to date with all things Town. Do a fantastic job there, as
Thank you
they
very
have
much.
for many, many years. They will still keep doing it every single season. We'll be back next week to recap Town's game against Wrexham, as well as any other news, all things Ipswich Town. If you want to head over to our socials and all that stuff, give the pod a rating, wherever you get your pods. We really do appreciate that. But once again, thanks to Phil and Kallum for joining, and we'll see you all next time.